Dr. Rudolf Martin Anderson spent 7 winters and 10 summers north of the Arctic Circle during his long career as a museum scientist. His important contributions to conservation, Arctic science, and cultural knowledge have never been fully recognized. Dr. Anderson was chief of the Biology Division of the National Museum of Canada from 1920 until his retirement in 1946. He worked in many parts of Canada, served on many committees, published extensively, and was honored by several international societies. Less than a year after Anderson and Stefansson returned from their 1908-1912 expedition, Stefansson was in New York and Ottawa looking for support for a second expedition to the Western Arctic. Dr. Anderson, who had agreed to accompany Stefansson on the planned trip, was then appointed to lead the newly created scientific staff of the Canadian Arctic Expedition. As an experienced Arctic zoologist, Dr. Anderson was the obvious choice to lead the southern party of the expedition, in charge of scientific research along Canada's Arctic mainland coast. Stefansson, as expedition commander and head of the northern party, was to search for new lands to the north. At the start of the expedition, much of the work of organizing supplies and equipment for the whole expedition fell on Dr. Anderson's shoulders. For the next 3 years, he was involved in all aspects of the expedition, from ordering food to packing the ships, navigating, and even acting as captain. The expedition set out from Victoria, British Columbia in June 1913 on the ex-whaling ship Carlick under the command of Captain Robert Bartlett. Severe ice conditions along the north coast of Alaska entrapped the Carlick and 3 other ships. The 2 smaller schooners were able to navigate through the ice in the shallow water near shore as far as Collinson Point, Alaska, where they overwintered. However, the Carlick drifted west with the pack ice and was crushed and sank in January 1914. Although most of the 25 people on board reached Wrangel Island, only 1 of the 6 scientists on board the Carlick survived. The men of Anderson's southern party, unaware of the Carlick tragedy, spent the first winter at Collinson Point, learning to hunt, travel, drive dog teams, and making various scientific observations. Anthropologist Diamond Jeunesse excavated old Inuit settlements on Barter Island and studied the Mackenzie Inuit. In the late winter, the topographers and geologists Kenneth Chipman, John Cox, and John O'Neill completed contour and geological mapping along much of the coast from the international boundary, up the Firth River, and throughout the east and west channels of the Mackenzie River Delta. In the summer of 1914, Anderson, in command of the schooners Alaska and Mary Sachs, made his way along the coast to Herschel Island, where they were joined by the North Star, another schooner purchased by Stefansson. The Alaska and North Star sailed east to Coronation Gulf, where a base was established at Bernard Harbor.
I had a pretty busy time last year, and for some time I had the responsibility of fitting out a fleet of 3 vessels. Mr. Stefansson, who was commanding the northern party of the expedition, came ashore from the Carlick and could not join the vessel again. He came along to our quarters at Collinson Point, Alaska, in the winter and organized an ice exploring party to go out on the Beaufort Sea. Nobody in the expedition favored this plan at all, as it conflicted with the work the men were sent up to do. But we managed to supply him with a good outfit, and 3 members of the expedition went out with him as a support party so that he could start on his final dash full of supplies, or as much as his sled could carry, including sealskin floats, tarpaulin for making raft of sled, etc. Nothing further has been heard of Stefansson's party since the support party came back. He sent back word that they might attempt to get across to Banksland on the ice. I sent the schooner Mary Sachs up to the west coast of Banksland last summer, and she will winter there. and look for traces of Stefansson's party. We came east with the other two schooners, the Alaska and the North Star, and have established a main base here for the next 2 years, or until 1916. Ilavernik, the Eskimo who was with me on my former expedition, gave me 2 barren ground bearskins prepared as scientific specimens which he had shot on the coast. He had preserved the skulls, but his dogs had got at them and chewed them up last winter. The moon is nearly full now, and the dogs howl in a most unearthly manner, giving vent to all their woes. The most emphatic objurgations from the men who are trying to sleep on shore fail to cause more than a temporary cessation of the famous Malamute chorus. It would make a fine rec for a gramophone if we had some blank records handy. Jim, the captured white fox, got out again last night and defied capture until this morning. He had damaged several bird skins and totally destroyed another. He seems to have been captured too old to be tamed, so I decided to add him to the skin collection, as I have been thinking of doing quite often recently. In the evening, Kairana and the woman and girl, Kunayak, sang each a song into the recording gramophone and were much excited and apparently pleased to hear it reproduced. Kairana looked rather apprehensive when Mr. Jennis showed him one cylinder marked Kairana and another Kunayak, but seemed relieved when told that he also had Pelayak and Mr. Johansson bottled up in other cylinders. Aurora Borealis. Brilliant aurora. Very variable, consisting mostly of shifting vertical moving patches, principally in the east. Color varied greatly in intensity, rosy red at bottom, shading into orange and green.
In February 1915, Anderson, along with Jeunesse and the marine biologist Fritz Johansson, explored the lower Coppermine River.
Many Arctic hare tracks on the lower boulder banks. Started up 2 hares among the rocks, where we saw many feeding places among the lichens. They run a few yards after being started up, then stop to look around.